Paul McSweeny. We're here at Pioneer Aero Limited in Ardmore, Auckland, standing in front of what looks to be an immaculate P-39 World War II fighter. You've been restoring this over a number of years, I believe. What can you tell me about the aircraft?
Okay, well, we got the aircraft largely complete from Australia in 2015, and we went backwards for about a year and a half before we started going forwards. One of those problems that you deal with. You don't like it, and obviously the owner doesn't like it, but it's something that that happened, and we put it right. So we're pretty proud of how it's turned out and how the aircraft looks now. So it's been an unusual project, first Aeracobra that we've done, and as far as I know, probably the first P-39 Airacobra that's been done since probably the 1990s. The last one was, I believe, done at Chino. Okay. So an unusual little aeroplane. Obviously the placement of the engine makes it a little bit odd.
And what was the rationale between for putting the engine behind the pilot like this?
Because as far as we know, Bell decided they were going to build this aeroplane around a cannon. So it was a 37mm cannon, and the placement of the cannon obviously couldn't be on the wing with a gun of that caliber. So they decided to put it in the nose, and then they sort of came up with the idea of if the cannon was in the nose, the engine had to go somewhere else, and the obvious place was in behind the cockpit. Big drive shaft that runs through underneath or across the top of the cockpit floor, and a reduction gearbox at the front. So yes, certainly different to anything that had been before it. And obviously it led on to the King Cobra, which is, to look at it, an identical aeroplane but completely different. It's larger in every respect, a lot easier to work on, a little bit more room everywhere in the King Cobra. But yeah, pretty, I think, an intelligent way about sort of going about it. They've been much maligned, I think, or they were much maligned during the Second World War. And probably rightfully so. They, you know, as most American aircraft didn't have the two-stage superchargers, so anything above 15,000 feet was really out of the question. With this particular aeroplane, you've got just a single-stage supercharger, but you also got a very small wing. So they didn't want to fly above 15,000 feet. And of course, the war in Europe was being fought at 30,000 feet.
High altitude,
so they weren't ideal for that theatre. But as the Russians found, they were absolutely ideal in Russia. And that's a combination of, I think, very robust little airframe and people flying them that flew them to their strengths rather than to their weaknesses. Right. You know, the Russians were clever. Right. They figured out that they were no good at high altitude, so they didn't fly there.
They used a lot as ground attack, I believe, is that right?
Well, yeah, they did. The 37mm cannon wasn't much good against the fully armoured tank, but obviously do a hell of a lot of damage against trucks and troop. But when they were designed, the prime reason for their design was to shoot down bombers. And the original concept was to have the Allison engine with a single-stage supercharger and a airframe-mounted turbo supercharger, same as the Lightnings had. And that would have, effectively you had a completely different beast. They had a lot of trouble, the metallurgy of the day, making those turbo superchargers work, so they really said, no, we're just going to put them on Lightnings, and you guys are going to go without. So right. They ended up with an aeroplane that was ideal down low but no good up high. Right. So the original concept, shooting down bombers, was lost.
Right.
So they had a few in the air with the war in Europe, didn't do that well, but they performed really well, certainly around the islands. New Guinea, Australians had some, right. And the Americans had a lot, obviously. But mainly in Russia. The Russians loved them. Yeah. Some of the Russian aces got huge scores flying these airplanes. Uh-huh. So I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with them. Like I say, much maligned by a lot of a lot of the press at the time, but certainly some pretty notable guys that flew them loved them. Chuck Yagen amongst them.
Oh, really?
Thought it was a great little airplane. Mm-hmm. Didn't really have anything bad to say about it. There was sort of hearsay about them tumbling in flight when the CG was wrong and that. I don't think anyone ever got to sort of make that happen. Yeah, like I say, very, very unusual. You know, we used to P-40s and yaks and things with the engine up the front, and the added complexity you get by putting the engine in the middle is huge.
It must be a bit of a nightmare to get it in and out of there.
Yeah, that's actually not so bad. It's all, you know, quick release, but just the, you know, getting the control from the stick to the tail. You know, normally you just run it down the centre or along the side of the fuse. With this aeroplane, it's got to go down, thread between the engine and the coolers, and then go back up again. And it's just little stuff like that that you don't really think about until you start working on it.
Right.
So, added complexity, I think, is a good way to put it. But I mean, it's grown on us. It certainly looks a bit odd. The nose wheel's not something we're used to, I suppose.
Yeah. I suspect a lot of people tomorrow will be surprised.
Yeah. And in fact, I got up yesterday. We took a few photos, and if you get, you know, right up on top of the spinner and you're looking at that 37mm cannon and the two 50mm cannons on top, it's a fantastic shot of this red spinner and then this green aeroplane sort of shrinking in behind it. It's only a 35-foot wingspan, so it is a pretty small aeroplane. And I think probably the penultimate air show performer, as in you can wind the window down and have your arm out as you're doing the flyby. So none of this sort of having the canopy, you can literally have your arm out the door. We haven't as yet put an ashtray in there, but we thought that, you know, the pilot may want to have a smoke to get that 1940s cool going, but we've resisted that. But effectively, you know, as you see it now, it's pretty close to flying. Like I say, we've had an issue with the propeller, which is being resolved now, and it'll be making noise shortly. We're keen to hear that.
Yeah, excellent. So what's the history of this particular machine? You said it came out of Australia?
Yeah, it's a fairly well-known saga. Four or more aircraft landed on the Cape York Peninsula. They ran out of fuel, got in some bad weather and ran out of fuel. And this was one of the four. So they remained up there until I believe the early 70s, when the Cairns aircraft recovery team went up and got them out and brought them back. And this went through a succession of owners, ended up at Precision Aerospace in Wangaratta. And then after the sort of unfortunate demise of the owner there, we ended up with it, let's say 2015. So yeah, it's an interesting aeroplane. Yeah.
And I believe from here it's going to Virginia Beach in the US for the Warbirds Aircraft Museum, I think it is. Is that right?
Yeah, Jerry Yagen's museum there in Virginia Beach. So he's got a lot of aeroplanes, and this will look good in the hangar beside the others.
So how many P-39s are flying around the world, do you know?
As far as I know, there's two, and they're both in the States currently. So there's one that the Confederate Commemorative Air Force, has, and also one that Rod Lewis from Texas has. So I've seen the CAF one, saw that up at Oshkosh a few years ago, and climbed all over those and took some photos. And actually, spoke to the guys up there that worked on it, and they love them. They think they're a good aeroplane, and certainly the pilots didn't have anything bad to say about it. Yeah. So it was a lovely little thing to fly, and we've got people lining up wanting to fly this one. So
I can well imagine. So this will be number 3. Excellent. Excellent.
Number 3. There's a few King Cobras flying as well. I think there's a couple of those flying too.
Okay.
And in fact, Jerry has a King Cobra on display there.
Oh right.
At Virginia.
Right.
So
excellent. So as you mentioned earlier, I mean you've got a lot of history with P-40 restorations.
Yeah.
What else have you got once this comes out of the hangar?
Effectively, we've got 2 P-40s on the go. So the P-40 in the back of the shed there is the next cab off the rank, so to speak. So once this is in a box and heading to America, that'll come up to the front here, and we'll start into that. We're hoping to have that done next year, so that flying next year. And the wings are finished, and most of the work's going to be centred around the fuselage and systems from here on in.
Right.
So that'll make that's number 9 P-40 for us.
Wow.
So considering there's 30 flying in the world, that's a third of the world's fleet that
pretty good ratio.
Gone through.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good. And then after that, another P-40.
Right.
So we're also actually trying to do a deal at the moment for a third P-40. So hopefully by middle of next year, we'll have 3 on the go in
Right,
here.
right,
Yeah.
right. And I'm sure if anybody has something derelict sitting in their backyard that they want fixed, they can come to your website and get in touch.
Absolutely. Look, we'd be more than happy to talk to them, yes. And of course, the other thing, as we spoke about earlier, we also have the world's only de Havilland Hornet project. So we've been advancing that along, and over the last year or so have purchased a lot more parts for it, and currently still looking for parts. So if anyone's got, de Havilland Hornet parts, we'd really love to hear from them, especially 4-bladed propellers at this stage. 4-bladed de Havilland propellers, yeah.
Right, okay.
So
excellent. So a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline still, which is good.
yeah, and we've got a couple of kingfishers as well, Vought kingfishers. I'm not sure where we're going with those yet. I suppose once this goes out the door, we'll start asking the owner the questions.
Yeah.
And but again, none of those flying in the world, the kingfishers. So very, I think, historically significant aircraft for the Americans. Saved a lot of down flyers and pulled a lot of people out of the water. Not so much, or not as well known down here, down in this part of the world. But both the ones we have are ex-Australian Air Force. So I think they were heading to Indonesia when the war broke out, and sent them to Australia, and they flew them on the lakes in Victoria almost as seaplane training.
Okay.
So yeah.
Oh, great.
So,
all right.
So we hope we've got enough work to keep us going for another few years, but we're always keen to talk to people who want to give us a bit more.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we'll make sure that the website is on the video as well, so people can get in touch.
Absolutely. Thank
Paul
you.
McSweeny, thanks very much.
Thank you, Alan.